Hey y'all, hey, I'm back with another video. So, today we are actually going to be doing a little bit of a breakdown here. So, the Mr. McMahon documentary came out on Netflix. Y'all know I will break down, go back and look at my past. I haven't done it in a while, but I'll break down a documentary real fast if I got the time. So, Mr. McMahon. Okay, so this is something that Netflix has been teasing. I'm just going to tell everybody up front it's not going to really touch on any of the new cases before I even get anywhere. So I know a lot of people might be a little disappointed that the majority of this was filmed from 2021 and back. So they have a couple of interviews like post, the news coming out. But just be clear that trust me, but there are still things in here that's related in a way, right? So I just want to say that in the offset. So I'm here. I'm going to review episode 1 and 2. There's 6 episodes, so I figure I break it up. 1 and 2, I'll do one for 3 and 4, and then one for 5 and 6. It also seems like they're going through eras wise. So that's what we are going to do. Now, this is gonna be my second time watching it. Like, now that I'm talking about it, I watched it last night. The other day, but I watched it all the way through. But I didn't take notes or anything. I was just kind of moving around the house. And then now this time watching it around, I'm able to actually take notes. So I clearly missed a whole lot the first time because there's a lot of stuff to me that's new. So let's kind of get into it. So we start off with seeing Vince. Now, I'm not gonna lie. Let me say this too. Also, I gotta give a couple presets too. I'm sorry before I get an episode. But as far as a wrestling fan is concerned, right? So me, I am 29, right? So for me, my quote unquote peak era, and we'll kind of get into this, is like the attitude era as they talk about in this doc. That's for me like peak wrestling as far as my memory is concerned, and like not just my memory, like when I was really into it. So with me being like a 90s baby, so growing up in the very late 90s but like early mid 2000s as far as being a kid is concerned, my point of reference when it comes to wrestling: The Rock, Steve Austin, Shawn Michaels, Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero, Stacy Keibler, Trish Stratus, who's in this, China, the Dudley Boys. Like, I come from that era. The Undertaker, Kane, I come from that era of wrestling. That's the era that, like I said, for me, it was like peak as far as me really being into it, me being a kid and stuff. So all of this to me was really interesting, especially again the latter half, the eras that I'm a little bit familiar with. I found all of that very interesting. I have not kept up with wrestling as much now. Since I believe last WrestleMania, I don't know when that was, but whenever the last WrestleMania was, when it was in Philly, I just kept seeing like so much about it and stuff online. So I'm like, bro, I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna check it out. And I really like what I saw. And so since this past WrestleMania, I've been keeping up. Like, I have this shit recorded. I already had Peacock, so a lot of times I'll just go and I'll keep up that way. I'm really behind, but again, I record and I have Peacock, so I'm trying to catch up. So again, I'm not all the way caught up with where we are today, but I got a good handle on like who's clearly like the biggest, stars of today in wrestling. But anyway, so to back it all the way up, we start off with the documentary. So it tells us again that we're in 2021. So you see Vince comes in, he's sitting in like a ring. I haven't seen Vince in such a long time. Oh my gosh, Vince looks like, what's up with his lips? Like, Vince looked like he's overly surgical. Like, he's old, but he like got a whole lot of surgery. I don't know. It's really weird. Anyway, so they pretty much ask, how he's doing, and he's like, it's a little weird because I'm not used to talking about me like outside of like, wrestling and stuff. I'm not really used to being a person that's talking about me unless like I'm a character or something. And so the producers pretty much go around and ask everybody. So you start to see who's gonna be in the docs. So they show Hulk Hogan, they show Linda, Shane, Stephanie, Triple H, The Rock, Bret Hart, Tony, I think Shawn Michaels comes a little bit later, but you know they have like all of the like John Cena, Cody Rhodes. They have like all of the big people, you know, that you will probably want to hear from, kind of pop up on the screen. So I'm like, okay, so we gonna get so we gonna get a little bit from everybody. Good. Okay, so again, they go around and they ask everybody, does anybody really know who Vince McMahon is? And you know, some people are like, no one really knows. Triple H says, like, I think Vince shows people, like, who he wants to. And Vince says, like, he don't even know. Like, he doesn't think people really know him outside of his bad character. But he's not even really too sure about himself. Now, they do flash something across the screen. And it says, before their final interview in 2023, I believe. Yeah. The news broke the scandal, which we'll get into a whole lot later. You know, the $3 million scandal. I don't know if y'all read them nasty ass text messages, bro. Those text messages, Vince is a freaked out man. But that's not what he went to. That's not what he was getting sued for. It was for a whole lot of other things. And, you know, they flashed stuff about, you know, him stepping aside. So, again, just to say, all of this, the majority of this is prior to his scandals, prior to all that coming out. So, episode 1 and 2, to me, to give like a little quick summary of both, to me, episode 1 and 2 is just kind of getting us to like where wrestling is pretty much getting mainstream. Like, how did Vince start off? How did he take the company? How did he build it up? And how did we get to, you know, how it's mainstream? So we're dealing mostly in the 80s for episode 1 and 2. Now we do start off, you know, with just talking about wrestling as a whole, and you know, how really it's American as hell. It's very ingrained into the culture, although it's very much so looked down upon. But how wrestling is really just like, you know, a soap opera. Because again, okay, so I'm not gonna lie, this is the craziest part, right? I don't know how it is today, because again, I'm almost 30. I'm not really sure how kids like interact with wrestling today, but again, growing up, everybody knew wrestling. Like, wrestling, at least over here in America, it's kind of a given to a degree. It's like one of those things where, like, as a kid, it's just something that you watch. Like, it's just something, even if you're not the biggest fan, you were at least familiar with different people. You had a favorite wrestler. Like, my parents pretty much would have grown up like in the 80s. So Hogan and all of that stuff, but they were still pretty young during that time. So when I'm a kid, like, even they're familiar with like who The Rock is and things like that. So it is super ingrained. It's not too many people that you're going to walk around and ask as a kid, like, did they watch wrestling? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Sure the fuck did. Why? Because it came on fucking regular TV before, you know, cable was kind of like a standard. It came on regular TV. Then, you know, once cable became a little bit, then you had Raw that went on, you know, to USA. So you could kind of flip back and forth between the two. But SmackDown, Raw, that's what I do wish that they would have touched on, like the SmackDown versus Raw, like, whole thing, but it is what it is. But anyway, yeah, it's super American, and again, it's something that's really, really ingrained. Most kids, American kids, have had a phase in their life where they were watching wrestling consistently. Now, back to the whole looking down thing, right? There does become a time, and this is something, again, that's very American, where a lot of us, once you kind of realize and find out that wrestling is fake, at least from my generation, at least, I can't speak for everybody else, but from my generation, it's like, once we found out that wrestling was fake, you know, and the veil is kind of taken off your eyes, it kind of like takes away from it. So you kind of start to leave the sport a little bit. Now, some people do come back, but that is a real thing of finding out, oh, damn, all this shit ain't even real. Because growing up, I definitely thought all of that shit was real, because they did a great job, as they talk about throughout this documentary, of blurring reality and fiction, because Linda McMahon, like when they talk about the whole family era, that's the era that I grew up in. Like when Shane and Stephanie and Linda and all of them are like really part of the storyline. To me, that's why it was most believable. Her and Triple H actually were married. You know what I mean? Now there were certain things come to find out, like Kane and Undertaker aren't really brothers, but I feel like that's why they did such a great job, at least for kids, as far as really believing it, right? So so we go over that, all that to say that I do think that wrestling is not looked upon the way it should be, although it's like kind of a given, and it's something that if you're American, for the most part, as a kid, you've kind of taken part in at one point in time. Everybody had a wrestler, everybody had a fucking ring in the cage, like it's a thing. So, we go into Vince's history, of him as a child, and he talks about, how he didn't meet his dad until he was 12. So, going all the way up until 12, he pretty much lived in a trailer park, he said. And he didn't talk too much about this, but I guess I gotta go and look at this interview that they keep alluding to, where he goes into more detail about how he was abused really badly by the stepfather. And so I think that really probably shaped him a little bit as well. So once he was 12, he actually met his dad. He said when he met his dad, he ran to his dad and gave him a big hug. And his dad was just like, all right. I mean, y'all know, it was them times. It's probably like the 60s, I would assume, 70. We ain't doing all that. So, he said he ends up finding out that his dad is a wrestling promoter, and he was one of the best ones. So, he said he learned a lot from just watching his dad. And one time, something happened with somebody not getting some money. So his dad was like, told Vince, like, you go ahead and you announce. Now, people say that he was a terrible announcer, but he was great because he had emotion. And Vince talks about how being an announcer, how he learned that it's really about putting together a story. You don't really want to just talk about what's going on when it comes to wrestling. You really want to put together something that makes sense, because a story is built to, grab emotion and things. And I just want to say, as much as Vince ain't shit, and he did a lot of terrible things, the way that he was really able to take wrestling from where it was to where it is today, where it's kind of like a staple. Again, like I said, wrestling is like a given. Like, it's just a given type of thing. That's amazing. And in the short amount of time, when we really go through the timeline, think about it. WrestleMania 1 was 1984. And we're in 2024. First of all, your business lasting that long is enough. But the fact that it's really cemented into culture, it's not just like a business. It's something that's like, if there was no more wrestling, that would be really weird. Even though I don't watch it, that would be weird. Amazing. Anyway, so he talked about, they talked about how there were no real territory lines or anything, but everybody kind of respected each other as far as people having their own wrestling networks. And so Vince and his father, they worked more so up in like the Northeast area. And again, just for like purposes, I am from New York City, right? So they worked very much so up in the Northeast, but Vince really wanted to start to go out and expand the territory. Now, again, there was no written rules. It was just kind of, back in the day, things was kind of on word. And Vince is very cutthroat. That's one thing you're going to like. Well, we knew that, but it's very clear that Vince do not care if it ain't about the money. And if it wasn't at the time about pleasing his dad, he did not care. He didn't care, right? So he started to go into these other territories because, his dad gave him a little bit more control. So he goes into all of these different territories. He starts to get a little bit more traction. And eventually, they're able to go national, which is a really big deal. Because now, instead of like the wrestlers maybe working with maybe the territory that they used to, or the company that owned the territory that they used to, why would I just stay right here in like the Midwest when I can get with the WWE? And now I'm going all across America. They had the bigger bag. They had more access. That's just how that went. So they talked about that, They then go to talk about the star, right? So I do think that this is really important. And I will say this. one of the things up until recently to me that the WWE has lacked is a really big star, right? Like if you think about the star, and it speaks to how important stars are. Like not just people, but I'm talking about real big ass stars that transcend wrestling, meaning you don't have to watch wrestling to know that that person's a wrestler and that they're a big deal, right? So the reason I feel like the WWE has had a problem in the last maybe decade or so, up until maybe more recently, is because they don't have stars that transcend. And I think that has to do with, just how like TV and media and entertainment just really isn't the same the same way that it used to be. But if you really think about like the wrestling stars of today that like transcend wrestling, that don't even wrestle for real, they come from the era of when I was a kid. So that would be The Rock. That would be John Cena. Like we're talking about people from that era. And I just really like how they highlighted how having a star and having that marquee person or a few marquee people is really, really important. And I think that's great that from the very beginning, Vince knew that. So they talk about, how the person that they had at the time, I cannot remember his name, no disrespect, that his dad wanted to push. He was like, I mean, he's a good wrestler, but he ain't got no pizzazz. So then, he said, I really like Dusty Rhodes. Now, if you don't know, right now, like the biggest person in wrestling, I would say like the top person would be Cody Rhodes. His dad is Dusty Rhodes, right? So, he said, I really wanted to use Dusty. And they show like a lot of clips of Dusty, and it's like, yeah, I could see why you would want to use him. He said, but Cody said that the reason that he's always heard from his dad was because he just didn't feel like what Vince wanted to do was going to work. Like his idea of where he wanted to take the business was just way too large and he couldn't really get with it, right? So here comes Hulk Hogan. Now, I don't really have to say much about Hulk. Like Hulk is a household name. Again, talking about people that transcend just the world that you're in. So we do, a quick background on the Hulk. And just how he was wrestling for a long time, but he really started to pick up traction when he started to go against Andre the Giant. Most people should know Andre the Giant. Need I say more, right? And so he said, after fighting him, so many times, he started to get a whole lot more notoriety. And one of the things that he did a lot was TV matches where he would fight two guys at the same time. So Sylvester Stallone, had pretty much seen him, and really, 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 liked him and wanted him to do Rocky, right? And so I think the people he was working with, maybe it was the WWE that he was working with at the time, but he had asked about doing it. And he was like, well, they told me that if you do it, you're fired. And he was like, all right, fine. Because again, I'm a 90s baby, but even as a 90s baby, I know how big like the Rocky series is and was and how iconic it was and things like that. So he was like, I already knew how this was gonna go. I already knew how this was gonna go. So he went ahead, and he did Rocky. Huge, huge, huge success. It makes him a fucking star, right? So Hulk ends up, Vince ends up coming back to Hulk. Because one thing about Vince that you'll realize throughout this is Vince is really all about the money. He will literally work with the devil himself. He don't care. You could shoot Vince right in the eye. Right in the eye. He could be blind. But if he thinks that you and him working together will make a bag, he's going to do it. It don't matter if you cost him a bag. If he can make money with you or off you, he don't care. Like that's just a fact, and that's been proven clearly throughout a lot of different scenarios. He do not care. So again, they end up coming back together, and then that's when they kind of start. So Hulk said that he believed in Vince from the very beginning. He saw his image, and he was like, he saw his vision, and he was with it. He was like, let's fucking go. So then we talk about, one of the biggest, one of the first big things that Hulk had as far as like rivalry, like, back and forth, And so, he talks about how Iron Sheik, right? Let me say, shout out to, I think, FD Signifier. He did a great video on like black wrestlers in the WWE, and I think like I can't, everything that I want to say is that video, you know, and that was shown a couple of times, which they did acknowledge. They played up on a lot of like stereotypes to kind of, you know, be it like this foreigner versus the US. And that's kind of what Hulk was. Hulk was the all-American, a fight for, I am a real American. Like literally, that's his whole thing. So with the Iron Sheik at the time, you know, it was the war with Iran. And so, you know, he thought it would be a good idea to just have like, really, again, this real stereotypical person from Iran. And then you got Hulk, the great American who's coming, you know. So, you know, he said that Hulk really talked about how in a lot of the fights, especially when he was wrestling, how those moves weren't practiced or nothing. Everything was being caught on the spot. Everything was being caught on the spot. So, you know, he said he caught that entire fight on the spot. Hulk wins. He starts to become like a national daggone hero, right? So then we start to talk about Vince and his dad and, you know, how they started to clash because, you know, it's WWE right now. It used to be WWF, but it's WWE. World Wrestling Entertainment. So for Vince, it's always been about entertainment, and he's always looked at wrestling as being more of a, as we talked about, like a soap opera. It's really just a show versus Vince's dad really just like the pure essence of just wrestling. And so, you know, they really clashed about that a lot, you know, but eventually Vince was able to buy his dad out. So he did, you know. And so Vince was like, you know, we just started all of these different things because, you know, he said, I wanted to make it all connect. You know, yes, wrestling is at the heart, but it's not just wrestling. We have disconnected, and you can tell to this day, Cardi literally just dropped, I just did a video about Cardi. Cardi literally just dropped something, an ad the day before yesterday, I think with Bianca, saying that she's gonna, in some way, somehow, be at SummerSlam next year. And can I also say really fast, sorry, pause for a second. I know that WrestleMania is going to be in Vegas next year, and I'm going. Let me tell you, I will be there because Vegas is my favorite place on earth. I go to Vegas every year. It's not, the last year I did not go, and this year I didn't go, and that's because I had a baby. Outside of that, I went every year, and I'm going again next year. So if you think I'm not going, I will. But I saw somewhere that you guys are asking for 50,000 American USD doubloons for front row tickets for 2 nights. 50,000, as somebody said, I better have my own opening theme song, pyros, and I want the belt. $50,000. Have fun. Hopefully you get your company to that point to where somebody's willing to pay that. Amen. Anyway, so, you know, so Vince, again, was just doing all of these different type of things, you know, because he wanted it to be more entertaining. So then we go on to, you know, how we were starting to bring the WWF more into mainstream, right? Because that's really the whole point. So we go to MTV, and this is when MTV actually showed music videos, right? Actually was music television. It wasn't called that just because, I promise, they actually used to show music, like music shows. It's crazy, right? So anyway, so Cyndi Lauper, girls, they wanna have fun. Oh, girls just wanna have fun. Wanna have fun. Quintessential 80s song. Like, if there was a song to me that could wrap up the 80s with a boat, it would be that song. Like, sonically, like, as far as the pop at that time. But anyway, in her video, she had, oh crap, what was his name? I lost it. I think his name was Lou Albano, and he was a wrestler. And so they met like on a plane or whatever. And so from there, that's how we kind of start this relationship between the WWF and Cindy. So Cindy kind of, joins the storyline where her and the wrestler that was in the music video, are now not getting along, and how, she's gonna pretty much sponsor a woman to, pretty much fight on her behalf. I think that's a great idea, and I'm pretty sure that really worked at that time. That's great. Love that. They do that to this day. Like, I like when they do that. I think it makes sense. It's a good idea of blurring reality into fiction. It's a great job of that, right? So, they talk about that and just how like that storyline was really, really important and really pivotal. So then we move on to the makings of the first WrestleMania, right? So Vince says that to him, doing WrestleMania just made sense because everything else has combination when it comes to sports. So why wouldn't they have one? So the biggest lineup for that was Mr. T, who was Mr. T at that time, and Hulk Hogan, okay? They were going to do a closed circuit, which is when people kind of like watched like in a live event, but they were all kind of like in the same place. Kind of like, what's that word? Y'all get it. Anyway. So he pretty much banked a lot on this. They talk about the different promotions. And so they also talk about how John Stossel, the reporter, if y'all saw him, y'all would know. I'm going to put him up here, right? So he was a reporter. Now, he said he was coming to see if Hulk was really as popular, as people was like really trying to make it, right? But come to find out, he wasn't really there for that. He was running around asking all of the different wrestlers, like, is it fake? And like, what do y'all do? What do y'all not do? And so Tony pretty much says that Vince had came in and was like, man, I wish somebody would do something about it. And so the producer was like, so are you telling me that he told somebody to go? He said, I'm not saying that, but he did allude to it. Now Hulk was like, I didn't hear Vince say that. Of course you didn't, Hulk. You and Vince are like two peas in a pod. Y'all really are. And so David Schultz, which was another wrestler at the time, we see him getting interviewed. And so he was like, so you think wrestling is fake? And he said, well, I don't know. And he just smacks him. And he's like, is it fake? Smacks him again. That is hilarious. Like, if that was to be shown today, that would be a meme. That's hilarious. That's funny. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care if it was wrong. It's funny. Because, and then Hulk was like, I mean, we were just really protective of our stuff. I bet y'all were. But that's really, really funny. Then we do like a little quick blurb about how Richard Belzer, aka Munch, may he rest in peace, from Law and Order SVU. Dum, dum, dum. Okay, he used to have a talk show back in the day, and Hulk went on there to pretty much like just defend, wrestling, because he said people were coming at them at the time, and he pretty much put Richard like in like a little headlock kind of, and when he let go, he hit his head. even looking at the footage, it's wild. I don't know how he hurt himself. Like, how did he hit his head so hard that it bled? Maybe the drop was higher than it looked, but even on camera, it looked really wild. It looked like, how did you hurt yourself off of that? But anyway, he was just like, all of that to say, fuck, Vince was over it. Because he's like, bro, we really need to sell this. They mortgaged everything that they own to get this done. So 1985, which is interesting because that means next year will be 40 years. So WrestleMania 1. Okay. Again, he wanted to show that it was deeper than wrestling. So they talk about pretty much like how it was really a big success, and it was great, to see like the arena. And I love the fact that they still have the footage. The footage is amazing. The footage is great. And so the Mr. T and Hulk thing just really sold. It was like a really, really big deal. And WrestleMania 1 is what put them pretty much on the map. That's pretty much what happened. It put them on the map. And from there, things start to go a little bit awry. The feds start coming for that ass, okay? That was episode 1. So let's move on to episode 2. So then we move on to episode 2, okay? And so now we're talking about pretty much how, WrestleMania 1 put them on a map. So now we're getting more into like how they became a little bit more mainstream. So they talk about how they had, they got the deal with NBC to do Saturday night main event. And again, if you ain't old enough, I guess you wouldn't know that back in the day, being on network television, so NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, like all of the main network channels, quote unquote. That was a big deal because those are channels that that broadcasted nationally. You know what I mean? Versus just like locally or within your area. So that was a really, really, really big deal. But they talked about pretty much how a lot of the work was on the back of the wrestlers, and I'm pretty sure that's not that shocking to most of us that they really weren't treated the best. Tony said they worked 7 days a week. They didn't even get Christmas off or Thanksgiving, nothing. Working. And Bret Hart even says that like in the late 80s, it was just real bad. It was just real bad as far as how much they was working. They do talk about how a wrestler named Jesse Ventura, he really wanted to try to get a union. Now, this part really killed me, right? Because, Hulk Hogan says, well, yeah, I'm really team, I'm team Vince. So, when I heard about Jesse doing it, I went and I told him, I said, yo, they trying to start a union and they just trying to do this nonsense. And everybody was like, you double crossed him because you didn't have to do that, bruh. Like, I get it. I'm not surprised because you're the prized company man. You're the prized company man. And at this point, you're pretty much Vince's golden child. So, of course, your loyalty is going to be to him. And, I mean, that's still foul, though. Because at the end of the day, you're still a wrestler, though. You're still a wrestler. You're not Vince. Unless Vince gave you some type of stock in WWE, which it doesn't sound like he did. So, I thought that was, like, messed up for real, but whatever. So they say that like once Hulk went and told Vince that Vince was pulling everybody in the room individually in meetings and was like, look, if y'all go to this meeting with Jesse, all of y'all are fired, which is normally what happens when you have a whistleblower. Like if they would have just been able to do it. And I think to this day, they said that there's not a union for the WWE, which is wild to me. That's wild. Y'all should definitely have a union. So that was kind of that, talking about just like the ramp up of everything. So then we go on to 1986, WrestleMania 2. They said that Vince tried to get a little different. He tried to do WrestleMania in 3 cities at one time, but that did not work out. And I'm like, Vince, this is 1986. I know for a fact the technology wasn't all the way there yet, like very ambitious, but even now I wouldn't want to watch WrestleMania in that way where there's like a 3 split screen. I wouldn't want to watch it that way. So I don't like that idea anyway. So they said WrestleMania 2 was okay. And it was technically successful, but it wasn't as big as WrestleMania 1. So then we go on to 1987, WrestleMania 3. So at this point, Vince is like, okay, what can we really do to up this? So he decides to hold it at Pontiac Stadium, which I think it holds like 93,000 seats, right? Which we'll get into the back and forth of what the number is and things like that. But he was like, the only way for me to really, really sell this out, because at the time, Hulk was pretty much, still really, really, really popular. But there was really nobody else to really rival Hulk in that way. So the only person he can think of was Andre the Giant. Now, by this point, Andre the Giant, that man done went across seas. He filming the daggone Princess Diaries. That man is on the other side of the damn pond. So Andre the Giant said, look, I did my part and I'm going to get my money and I'm going to cash out because my back hurt and all this other stuff. I'm done. So Vince pretty much, had to kind of convince him like to come back because he actually had really bad back pain and he needed to get this surgery. But he was putting it off for a long time. Him and Vince talk, and he's like, all right, I'll do it or whatever. Once Vince kind of told him how many people was going to be there, he was like, all right, don't worry, I'll do it. And not only did they do Hulk versus Andre the Giant, but they made Andre the Giant the heel, which is the bad guy, quote unquote, in wrestling. So they went on this crazy big press tour or whatever. It's time for WrestleMania 3. It's packed out. Now, there's some back and forth on whether it was 93,000 people or 78,000. But like the person said, I don't think it really matters. The point of the matter is, look at it. That it was packed out and the impact is the impact. So does it really matter in the grand scheme of things? Not really. Who cares? So Hulk was talking about how he really didn't know whether or not Andre was gonna let him win. And he kept asking Vince, and Vince was like, I don't know. And then Hulk was like, right before they went out, he asked Andre, and he said, don't worry. And Vince is like, don't worry, he's gonna do the right thing. And Hulk was like, how the hell am I supposed to know what that means? So they come out. The entrances for both was sickening. Like, you could tell Hulk was feeding off the crowd. I could see why he was like as popular as he was at his time, during that time at least. So then we have Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, doing America Beautiful, America the Brave, whatever the hell that damn song is, right? And so they fight pretty much. And Hulk said that he did not know that he was gonna win until Andre did not kick out, which I think is great. I think that's how they should probably do like most matches. That'd be actually like a really nice time, right? So that WrestleMania took Hulk from like being pretty okay known to like next level, like Hulkamania full, not Hulkamania effect, but like it just starts to go crazy. At this point, like the Hulkamania effect is taking off and he's going crazy. He's everywhere. Everybody knows who he is. And Hulk said, like, everything that you guys ever heard me say, that was Vince. Like, I would think it's dumb, but Vince would tell me to say it and I would do it. And so they showed like little clips of that, which again, he made the character Hulk Hogan. So I could see why Hulk's loyalty is to Vince, but at the same time, it's like Vince is really a shitty person at the same time. Then they talk about how once that happened, that WrestleMania, that's when they started to move into merch. And one of the news reports said that they made over $200 million in 1 year in merch. Let me tell you something about the merch. Yes, ma'am, because the rings, all of the wrestlers, obviously, if you get the cage to go on top of it, you gotta get the ladder, you gotta get the chairs, like you need the freaking announcer stand, like the merch. I'm one of those people. I'm literally one of those kids that took part. Maybe not during the 80s, but in general, yeah, for sure. So Hulk at this point, is saying to Vince, like, this is cool and everything, but like, I'm ready to get out of here. I want to do Hollywood stuff. So Vince is terrified because you're going to lose your marquee person. So he was like, all right, if you want to do Hollywood, let's do it together. They do this cheesy ass movie that was just fucking, it was terrible. It was terrible, right? So then we move on and we get to WrestleMania 6, right? Now at this point in time, Hulk's star is starting to fade just a little bit. Like, he's still Hulk, but the excitement isn't there as it once was. So then we have the Ultimate Warrior, who was, starting to get a little bit more popular. So they decide to do, Hulk and the Ultimate Warrior, but they let the Ultimate Warrior win because Hulk was thinking, all right, I'm gonna just pass the torch to him and let him do it. But that didn't really pan out because according to Hulk, he said, you had somebody who wasn't in love with the business. So maybe he didn't just like the business side, but he didn't mind wrestling. So that didn't really go far. So then they decided to do, oh my gosh, I didn't write down. It's like Sergeant somebody, but pretty much he was somebody that was from Iraq, going back to the whole Iron Sheik with Iran thing. So now there's like, there was tensions between Iraq and the US. So they have this character, that sergeant from Iraq, and now him and Hope, are pretty much not getting along. But in the midst of all of that, what happens? Because it's the 90s, Desert Storm. So Desert Storm happens, which makes that whole thing, I mean, it's already messed up. Like, be clear, before we get to Desert Storm, that wasn't okay anyway. And a lot of times, a lot of the characters in the WWE are a lot of times like caricatures. Like, not characters, but caricatures. So, and a lot of times, like, really bad stereotypes, which I'll get into later about, like, why for a long time I didn't like John Cena and his character, but we'll get into that later. But yeah, so, they started to pull back a little bit because the character was actually starting to get, like, really, like, bad death threats and things like that. So, they end up pulling back a little bit, and, they do the match, Hulk wins, and again, people are excited, but it's not the same type of excitement, meaning that, something is about to change coming down the line. So then we have 1991, okay? So then we have I'm gonna call him Dr. Z because I cannot say his name, but Dr. Z. So he was a doctor that was pretty much, now Vince says that he was assigned to the WWF or whatever as a doctor to just make sure that everything was on the up and up, and he was arrested by the government for pretty much selling steroids to wrestlers and things like that. And at that time, steroids were starting to be like illegal. So it was starting to be a really, really big deal. I did not know that Vince and them had the bodybuilding federation at that time. I say, yo, the timing couldn't be worse. The timing of there being a steroid case tied to you when you're trying to do a bodybuilding federation. I said, shut the whole thing down. Just shut it down. And that's what he did. Smart businessman. He shut the whole thing down. And then at this point, so now we're getting into the different lawsuits that are starting to pile up on Vince, because now it's starting to pick up. So you got the doctor case about the steroids. Then you have different women, who are coming out, which we'll get into some of them, accusing Vince of abuse, and just women in general. So they talk really briefly about the women in the WWF at the time. And, just how they were absolutely abused. Tony admitted that they treated them like toys. They did not respect them. And working there was probably not a good time. I couldn't imagine. I do wish, they did briefly talk about, the women and how they were treated and stuff like that. But I really wish that there would have been more of a highlight on the women that actually did make an impact, as a girl, I wish, Chyna, you had your Trish Stratus and your Stacy, but then there was Chyna, and Chyna wasn't playing no games. I just wish that they would have maybe took a little bit more time to focus in on, the good shit that the women did do, outside of them being abused and stuff, the way that they actually contributed to everything. They did that here and there, but not the way that they really should have. But anyway, we can keep going. So they talked about, again, all of the different things that's connected to the WWF as far as women and being abused. They bring up Johnny Snuka, I think that's how you say his name. And in 83, he's a wrestler. And in 83, his girlfriend died mysteriously. Now the coroner ruled it as a homicide, but he was never charged. So, it's rumored that, Vince pretty much helped him get out of that. Then there was a situation with one of the ring bosses, this black guy, and he was messing around and touching on the little ring boys, the boys who helped put up the cages and stuff, and how that was a big thing. Then they talk about how amongst that whole little ring boy situation, how there was 3 executives from WWF that was being accused. And from what I'm getting, from what everybody says, it seemed everybody feels like one of them named Pat, that he didn't do anything. The other 2, they're not defending at all, but that one, they feel like he didn't do anything. It's just the fact that he was gay. So people were pretty much trying to come after him. I don't know, because I don't know. I got to read the documents, but I ain't believe it, because he worked for the WWF. Vince fired those 3 executives, and then he hired Pat back a little bit later. So my thing is, are y'all saying that because Pat's back now? I don't know. I have to look at the cases to really give an opinion on that. Then we talk about the girl referee. So they had one girl referee, one at the time. And of course, it's the one that you had to fuck that up, right? So she ends up taking Vince to court, because she says that he R-worded her. And, he tried to say, oh, it was consensual. It didn't happen like that. And what the most disgusting part is, he was like, well, that didn't happen. It was consensual. And even if it was the R word, it's past the statute of limitations. So it don't even matter. I hate when people stop saying that things are past the statute of limitations to excuse something. It's disgusting. Yes, in the court of law, but period, it's still disgusting. And the key about that part is, at the very end of the episode, they said that she sued that in 2023, that he settled with her Now, it might have took from 91 to 2023, but she got her bag, is the point. She got her bag. And you tried it. And you really, really, really tried it. To sit there in 2021 and say that and then pay her off in 2023 is wild. That's wild. That's wild. That's wild. That's wild. So, but he tried to sue her back, but it fell through. It didn't connect. So then we get into the indictment that happened to Vince in 94, right? So one of the characters, not characters, one of the people that's in the documentary is a guy named Phil. Now he was he is a reporter, but he at the time was one of the only people that was really reporting on wrestling because a lot of people felt like, oh, ain't nobody paying attention to that. So he was on Vince's ass and he admitted right there on camera, yes, I was an informant for the FBI, but the way it went is that I will write my stories and then the FBI would actually look into the stories that I wrote and then they would contact me. So yeah, he's a piece of shit. So I sure did do it. I was like, yo, y'all love admitting that y'all be informants. That's wild to me. But Vince was doing wild shit. So I don't really got much to say. So 94 comes. He gets indicted or whatever. And, he said that they wanted him to, cop a plea. And he was like, absolutely not. We'll be going to trial. So around this time, right, Vince allegedly had a neck surgery. Y'all can't even see my hands. I'm doing air quotes. A neck surgery. And he tried to say, oh, people wanted to say that I was doing it for sympathy. But no, I was. Bruh, you are a script writer. You do entertainment. You ward for sympathy. It is what it is. It's a classic move. We've seen it done before. Whatever. So there's a lot of different things going on, right? So you got the case against him, the case about the steroids. You just got a lot going on around him at the time, right? So Hulk Hogan at the time can kind of see everything that's kind of going on around Vince. And he's also being able to tell that, like, the tide towards him was kind of shifting a little bit. People weren't really into him the way that people thought, that like, or not thought, but the way that people used to be into him is just not like that for the Hulk anymore. So he was like, I think it's time to leave, I think I've had enough. So then we go over to WCW for a second, right? And I'm not going to lie, growing up as a kid, bitch, I did not know the difference between WCW, WWE, WWF. I didn't know the difference between any of them. And you want to know why? As I went through this documentary, I learned why. Because y'all literally shared wrestlers back and forth. And as a kid, you don't really put two and two together all the time that these are separate companies. You just think that it's all wrestling, right? So whatever. So we got Ted Turner, who we know is super, super iconic in the cable, TNT, CNN, real big guy in cable, billionaire. The one that, if you watch the Real Housewives of Atlanta, that's the person that Marlo was allegedly fucking. Okay? That old ass white man, that billionaire ass white man. Anyway, so he had the WCW, and somebody described it like the WCW had been around for a long time. And it was number 2 compared to WWE. But it's like, the number 1 and number 2 gap is just insane that they shouldn't even be called number 2. Like, the gap is insane. And that's kind of true. It kind of reminds me of like, if you're into, to like battle rap, like URL is like that's it. Everything else is like, okay, all right, it's fine. I'll watch it. But it's URL. Like, they the top, right? So they talk about, how, Eric, I think his name is Bischoff, talks about how, when he came on, it just seemed like they was just really trying to copy whatever the heck like WWF was doing, but just in a more cheesy way at the time. And so, he was like, okay, well, I saw, that Hulk is no longer, going to be with the WWE because, he ended up leaving and, we was both working on the same set. So I just pretty much pulled him to the side and, he offered him a deal. Now, Hulk said at that time, he really hated acting. It wasn't what he thought. He didn't like being in the trailer. He's like a performer, like in that sense, not really more of an actor. So he was like, when he left Vince, he did tell Vince, I would never run against you, which is why Vince let him out of his contract. He said, but WCW said that they was going to give him more money and that all he had to work was 30 damn days. When you're coming from working every single day, 7 days a week, and on top of that, you're not even making the same money. Like somebody explained it in the documentary that Ted would come to the wrestler and say, well, I'm going to give you $1 million to work for me. And then they would say, well, how many days is that for? And he would be like, you tell me. And they'll say, 100 days. He'd be like, all right. Because see, that's the thing. And Vince did admit that because Ted Turner was a billionaire, he had that capital. It was nothing for him to give Hulk probably a couple mil just to come in for 30 days out of the year. And that's it. Because Hulk really wanted to be at home with Brooke and them, right? Shout out to Brooke Hogan. That first album is really underrated. Anyway, so that's what ends up happening. So we have Ric Flair, woo, versus Hulk. Okay, so now that's the big matchup. Shane McMahon was real salty about that. But my thing is, Vince, it seemed to me, he said that he was annoyed by it, but at the same time, he said, but how can I get mad? That's my thing. I was like, if Vince is really a businessman and he's really about his money, how could he really be mad at that move? And he said he got it. Like, they're offering you more money for less work. That makes all the sense in the world. So the only thing so far I could really give Vince is that he really do stand on business. Like, literally, if it make money, it makes sense. And he don't care how it look, how dirty, how underhanded, even if you're fucking him over. He'd be like, I get it. I see it. And I can respect somebody that do that. Like, for sure. They then talk about how they tried to, how they had Hulk testify against Vince, because they had something over Hulk, which he wouldn't say what it was, but they had something over him. And it's either A, we're going to go after you, or give us something on Vince or whatever, which is pretty much what's happening right now with the Diddy trial, if y'all do not know. And so Hulk, he said, I did the best that I could do on that stand. And even Vince said that Hulk did the best that he could do, that he could tell that he wasn't trying to throw him under the bus on the stand or nothing. He literally did all that he could do. So he wasn't mad at the fact that, he took the stand or whatever. And so, so that's pretty much episode 2. So I really liked episode 1 and 2. I think it gives a good background for, how everything was at that time. And I'll be back with episodes 3 and 4, which is more my